On this first day on the job for the Chief of Staff, hours into General John Kelly's job, we have learned that the Chief of Communications, Anthony Scaramucci, who had been at his post for all of 11 days, offered his resignation. He is out. A couple of quotes before we talk to Jeff Zeleny. John Kelly is in charge now, one source close to Kelly tells CNN. And apparently, actually, Jeff Zeleny, let me bring you in and we can deliver this together. The news behind the timing, apparently, and you tell me, it was General Kelly who thought that Scaramucci wasn't quite disciplined enough, right? That he had burned his credibility in his post.
Sure, Brooke. I mean, that's what we are learning this afternoon. And it is also a sign that the president is giving his new chief of staff the full authority that he promised he would or said he would last Friday when he made this surprise announcement that Reince Priebus was leaving. But as it pertains to this, Brooke, we are being told that Anthony Scaramucci was essentially escorted off the White House property earlier this afternoon. It was after the chief of staff, John Kelly, said, look, he does not think that he is right for this White House. All goes back to the tone of that conversation, the interview with the New Yorker magazine, Brooke, that was so incendiary and really divisive. I'm also being told this afternoon that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and senior advisor, as well as Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, also supported this decision for Anthony Scaramucci to leave. But we should also point out they also supported the decision for him to come in. And in fact, Ivanka Trump was in the room when the president was interviewing him for the job just less than 2 weeks ago, Brooke. So this is all happening pretty abruptly. There was a big question in Washington, how long would Anthony Scaramucci stay on the job? Few people thought that he would be leaving this afternoon, Brooke. But also we're told the president was sounding people out, as he often does throughout the weekend. And he talked to one ally who said this, Brooke. He asked if Anthony Scaramucci had seriously and permanently damaged himself. This ally of the president says, yes, sir, I believe he has. The president agreed. That was yesterday. So, Brooke, that sort of sets the conversation, the table for what happened here today when the new chief of staff came in. Really one of his first official acts, Anthony Scaramucci out. Brooke.
Hang on a second, Jeff, just quickly. Did you say Scaramucci was escorted off the property?
We are told by our producers here, our team here, that he was escorted off the property, which isn't necessarily unusual. I mean, if someone is no longer working here, he has no reason to be here. So we are told that he was escorted off the property earlier this afternoon. Now the question is what happens next. Most people in Donald Trump's orbit, President Trump's orbit, never leave entirely. They go to a different part of the structure or the system. He obviously still supports this president very much. So we'll be keeping an eye on and trying to report more what he's going to do after this. I expect that he will stay in his orbit as an outside advisor of some kind, perhaps even some other type of job in the government. I wouldn't rule that out, Brooke. But in terms of the White House grounds, the West Wing here, he is no longer here.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. Great reporting, as always, from the White House. Mark Preston is here. Gloria Borger is back. Thoughts, ruminations?
Well, a couple things. One is his legacy will go down as...
Can you have a legacy after 11 days?
Oh, no, you absolutely can have a legacy after 11 days.
Short legacy.
Short legacy.
Okay.
One is he forced the chief of staff and the communications director to leave. In many ways. It was his actions that did so. The briefings apparently are now on the camera. We're going to see a briefing later on today that will be on camera. He said he wanted to open that up, so perhaps that's another legacy thing. And quite frankly, we're never going to forget about the telephone call that he had with our friend and colleague that put him in this situation, Ryan Lizza.
So there are a couple of things I'm hearing. One is that the president over the weekend was asking some of his closest allies about what they thought of Scaramucci and his behavior and should he get rid of him. And clearly the answer was yes. The other thing that I heard from a source close to the White House is that General Kelly I was told, made the decision 2 to 3 days ago. So if we're trying to piece this all together, perhaps Kelly made the decision that this needed to happen, went to the president. The president maybe was sounding out his friends and allies. And then this source also said to me The days of tolerating BS in this White House are over.
Right.
Oof.
You know, I think there's something to be said about pulling the Band-Aid off, right? So the Band-Aid has been pulled off. This has been a very difficult time in terms of personnel at the White House and having the right people in place. I mean, I hate to say this, but we could actually see more people go now. I mean, you have a new chief of staff who does want to bring order, you know, to the White House and perhaps a more military type structure. We could actually see more people go.
You know, we were having this whole conversation when it was all breaking. You and Challian made the great point about the star getting a tad, burning a little too brightly when you're in a situation where there is really only one star, that being the President of the United States. We talked once upon a time about maybe Steve Bannon and the caricature of who he was and what he represented to the press and everyone else, a little too big for the President. And do you think that that was the case with Scaramucci, with this piece in the New Yorker, the 30-minute, you know, conversation he had with Chris Cuomo on this network end of last week? Sorry. Do you think that that was a piece of it?
Yes, I think so. I think there's no brighter star in the constellation than the President of the United States. And when you have somebody coming out, as you have a new chief of staff coming in saying, I'm going to fire everybody, or while your old chief of staff is sitting there, it's unsustainable. It's untenable. And remember, we did not hear, Donald Trump didn't tweet about Scaramucci's vulgarity. You know, he didn't come out and say, by the way, I don't approve of this, because the message that Scaramucci was delivering, as vulgar as he delivered it, was that I want the Reince Priebus has got to go and Steve Bannon has got to go. And that was clearly sanctioned by the President of the United States. I think the way he did it got him in a lot of trouble. And I think that that's a real issue.
It's just interesting to know what you're telling me from your sources, that the President had conversations over the weekend with people, maybe feeling them out as to what he should do with Scaramucci after this, you know, profanity-laced piece in the New Yorker, which, you know, any of us wouldn't be sitting here the next day had we used any of that language, and yet it took the President having conversations with other people to make a decision.
Well, I think what he was, I mean, I don't know the exact content of the conversation, but I guess it was, is he redeemable or not?
Yeah.
You know, does he have to go, or is there any way to salvage this? Because, you know, after all, Scaramucci clearly feels a bond with this president. And, you know, he's had a very bad week. I mean, there have been reports in the newspapers that he's in the middle of a divorce. He's just had a new baby. Now he's lost his job. You know, this is a lot of pile on. And it was, however, a problem of his own creation.
You know, I do think that what might be lost in all of this is that these conversations do happen a lot where there is so much infighting, but they're often not reported, right? I mean, the fact that he didn't know, as the communications director, he did not know the ground rules when he was talking to this reporter, where he just lit into everybody. That is a problem. Second thing is, when I talk to people on Capitol Hill, specifically Republican offices, you know, there's a sense of decorum still in Washington. As partisan as it is, as much as Democrats hate Republicans, there's a sense of decorum. And I think that from Capitol Hill, there was a level of unease having Scaramucci be the person who was going to be crafting the message for the president.
Right. Let me bring in Brian Stelter, our senior media correspondent here on all of this. And so, you know, Brian, we were talking, let's just jog back. I'm losing track of time frame. I don't know if it was weeks with Sean Spicer, you know, announcing, knowing that Scaramucci was coming in, and, you know, the president wanted to keep him, and he says, no, I'm going to leave by August. Is there any chance that Spicer might stick around with Scaramucci out?
I've asked him. He has not responded. He has declined to comment to other reporters asking that exact same question, Brooke. I think it's unlikely, but let's not rule anything out on this edition of White House Survivor. That's exactly what it feels like at this moment. I would suggest an alternative scenario to what Mark was just describing, that you see Scaramucci give this interview, shocking to everyone, including the president. It's possible the president wanted some of this to happen, wanted Scaramucci to go out there and shake it up and cause Priebus to be leaving. Who knows exactly? We'll see if the president tweets about this, but it's quite possible that Scaramucci was doing some things the president wanted, even when he called Ryan Lizza, but by not saying it was off the record, by giving those quotes, it does seem that it was the beginning of the end for Scaramucci. He was barely visible after that interview was published on Thursday. And just to reiterate one other point, on one level, this is a very sad human story, that he had a child born last week in New York with his wife. They're going through a divorce, according to the New York tabloids, which are, of course, feasting on this story. But people close to Scaramucci confirmed that he wasn't there for the birth of this child, that he wasn't able to meet the child for several days because of his brand new job at the White House that he had wanted for so long. It's a sad story on that personal, human level. And I wonder, what we don't know, Brooke, is what comes next for him, if he's going to have some other job in Washington or not.
Right. No, on the personal level, listen, we all wish him the very best. And you mentioned the Ryan Lizza interview. Guys, let me know, is Lizza on the phone? Ryan Lizza, are you with me?
I am. How you doing?
Hi, Ryan Lizza. Have you been keeping up with the news, say, in the last 30 minutes? Thoughts?
I have.
Thoughts?
You know, after that interview appeared, a lot of people asked me, do you think Anthony Scaramucci will be fired? And I would say, you know, he's either going to be fired or promoted. You never know with Donald Trump. And I think the early indications were that Trump was either neutral to positive about some of the things he said. And, of course, the biggest story in the wake of that interview was that Reince Priebus got fired, not Anthony Scaramucci. So that seemed to suggest where Trump, his opinion about the interview. But, you know, one thing I think here, and I don't know if we have this fully, we don't know this yet, but from the statement that the White House put out about saying that the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, should have a clean slate, it does suggest that Kelly is doing what any sane chief of staff would do, coming into a White House that's factionalized. He's trying to exercise control, make sure everything's running through him. And Scaramucci, of course, was famously reporting to the president, not to the chief of staff. And so, you know, it's a sign that perhaps Kelly has a little bit more authority that Reince Priebus did, if indeed that Kelly, you know, asked or wanted this to happen.
Yeah, yes to the clean slate. Yeah, okay. Yes to the clean slate. That was part of the White House statement, and also apparently, you know, General Kelly is chief of staff on day one. Apparently, he wanted him Scaramucci removed because he didn't think Scaramucci was disciplined and has burned his credibility. And listen, I know you were on TV all over the place in the wake of this extraordinary interview, but just to remind people, I mean, Mark Preston made the point. How did he not know? Is the comms director at the White House just like ground rules on talking to a reporter on the phone and what would be included and not included? I mean, you've been doing this for years. It's not like you cajoled this out of him. He just kind of let it rip.
Yeah, look, what happened was I had tweeted earlier in the evening that Scaramucci was having dinner with Sean Hannity and some other folks. He got out of that dinner, and he was getting requests from other reporters about it, and was informed of the tweet and then called me. The conversation started with him trying to find out who revealed what to me was relatively trivial information, who the president was dining with. And then it sort of, I guess you could say, escalated, or it sort of just went off in those multiple directions. And I sort of turned it around and turned it into an interview with him. And, you know, he went off on Reince Priebus in pretty colorful language, went off on Steve Bannon, the chief strategist over there at the White House, talked about calling in the FBI to investigate leaks, you know, without actually offering any evidence that there was something that the FBI should be investigating. And so it was, I mean, I've said this before, it was probably the most unusual interview I've ever had with a government official in 20 years of covering Washington.
And might be forever and ever from here on out. But what an extraordinary interview. And obviously it reached the president. Ryan, I'm going to let you catch your breath. Ryan Lizza, thank you so much for getting to a phone and calling in. As, listen, you in this story was, it sounds like a central piece in some of these decisions. Let's go back to the White House. Jim Acosta, our senior White House correspondent, because what are sources telling you about how the president perceived the interview between Lizza and Scaramucci and maybe talking about his ultimate decision?
Right, but we know from talking to sources that the president initially was pretty pleased with what Anthony Scaramucci said. He liked this sort of take no prisoner style that he was exhibiting last week, but that eventually the president soured on Anthony Scaramucci, felt that he was becoming more of a story than he was, or becoming more of a story than this White House was. And I can tell you from talking to a friend of Anthony Scaramucci just in the last several minutes, this source was telling me that Scaramucci talked to retired General Kelly, the new White House Chief of Staff, yesterday, and made this offer to him to step aside to give essentially the new Chief of Staff the ability to put together his own team and to have free reign. That's essentially what the White House is also saying about all of this right now, that Scaramucci decided to step aside to give General Kelly a clean slate. But this friend of Scaramucci also said that he plans to show up at his other job with the administration, and that is with the Export-Import Bank tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Obviously, you know, this is somebody who has been very close to the president over the last couple of years during the presidential campaign, during the transition, and then being here in office. And according to this friend of Anthony Scaramucci, the man known as the Mooch intends to be a utility player for this president and continue to be an outside advisor. And so they are trying very mightily over here at the White House to sort of put the best face on this. But Brooke, make no mistake, when the president is tweeting earlier this morning, no White House chaos, this has once again been a day of White House chaos and really the norm, not the exception over here. This is a White House that appears to be in staff chaos and staff turmoil from week to week. And that is why when you talk to people inside the administration, inside the White House, outside the White House, people who are close to the president, that is why they say to you that the first 6 months of this administration have felt like 6 years, because this is just something that constantly plays out. Keep in mind, Anthony Scaramucci just on the job for 11 days and has what is undoubtedly going to go down as one of the most controversial tenures that a White House communications director has ever had, and has done the exact opposite job of what a White House communications director does. This person wasn't shaping the messaging of this administration. This person, Anthony Scaramucci, was damaging the messaging of this administration. Brooke.
You were there in the briefing room. This is a must-see briefing. We're going to take it as soon as it begins there with Sarah Huckabee Sanders on quite a day at the White House. Jim, we'll stand by for that. Thank you so much. Right. As we got an eye on that podium, Lynette Lopez has just been seated from Business Insider.
We're trying to report.
The wall is gone. To you, what do you make of just all of this?
Scaramucci helped prompt Sean Spicer's exit. He helped contribute to Reince Priebus's exit. At least if you look at the chronology of the past 10 or 11 days, he went from being the most visible man at the White House last Sunday, 8 days ago, to being invisible this Sunday. Right after the Ryan Liz interview, no more interviews, no more press. All of a sudden, Scaramucci disappeared. So maybe that was a signal of what was to come today with Kelly taking charge. What this doesn't do is tell us anything about the press strategy at the White House. There's no clarity about what the press strategy is, if there is a press strategy at all.
He was saying maybe bring the cameras back. That's what we got from Scaramucci.
That's right. He was suggesting sort of a carrot and a stick, offering a carrot by allowing the cameras to be turned back on. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, all of a sudden, is the leading force now in the press shop. As the new press secretary, who will have to step in front of the cameras in 45 minutes, she is now the only person there that we've had there all along, now that Spicer and Scaramucci are both out.
I wonder if Spicer is having second thoughts with Scaramucci out of the shop. Just out loud musings here. I mean,
right.
David
He's being asked that question according to, I believe, Kevin Liptak, our White House reporter.
Right.
The upper press inside the White House, people are asking Spicer, are you going to stay now? No answer either way so far from Mr. Spicer.
Of course, Mooch became bigger than Trump, and haven't we seen this before? The fact that I'm using the word Mooch, using the name Mooch. Right. He was in the tabloids all weekend. He was the center of attention.
Worry with Bannon once upon a time,
exactly.
right?
But not in a good way. And he was getting, I was just texting with a source who said to me, look, he was getting too far out front and in a bad way, and that the president realized it. And I'm sure his family, by the way, realized it. I'm sure Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner did not like the language that Scaramucci was using. And to your point, there is only one star in this constellation, and that is Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Although the president gave Scaramucci his blessing before he came on with Chris Cuomo for that 30-minute interview on New Day, end of last week. But hang on, just going back to Sean Spicer briefly, is there a possibility that he's going to say, hit the brakes, record scratch, like I may want to stay at the White House because this guy's gone?
that seems
I'll
tough.
text him right now and ask. I find that very hard to imagine.
He hasn't been answering the question.
He hasn't been replying to me either.
Reince Priebus is gone now. Obviously, Sean was there as a Reince Priebus ally, part of the old RNC, Republican National Committee crowd that worked on the general election and then into the White House. So it is hard to see if you believe that President Trump is trying to unshackle himself from any restraints from the establishment where he still sees people who are resistant to him. Like, remember in that same interview on New Day that Anthony Scaramucci was talking about this notion of people inside the White House who still felt that they were trying to save America from Trump instead of injecting Trump into America. That was the Scaramucci language.
That's fascinating insight.
And, you know, I think Donald Trump is trying to make sure that he is clearing house of anybody who feels that they're somehow saving the country from the president.
So why not have Scaramucci resign after he said what he did to Ryan Lizza 4 days ago?
Because I think he's feeling people out, honestly. And I think the president was probably talking to Kelly, I have to presume, about this. And so I think there are a whole lot of things that are, you know, that enter into this decision. And by the way, it's a little more dramatic. Just let's say you have a new sheriff in town on one day and a head rolls that day, and it's done. I mean, it is a little reality TV like, you know, it is a little into the boardroom, and who comes out, and I think that that, you know, again, we have to hear from General Kelly and do our reporting here and find out exactly what the chain of events was on all of this that would make Scaramucci, you know, offer his resignation, because as he told us multiple times, he loves the president, and this is the job of his dreams.
Right. Were you going to say something?
And I was just going to say, new reporting coming in from Caitlin Collins at the White House that John Kelly felt like he was not disciplined and that he had lost his credibility in the wake of that New Yorker interview. So all of this was at play. And so even though I'm told that Kelly, that Scaramucci, I should say, offered to resign to Kelly, clearly he got the message that there was really no other choice.
Right. And again, this would not be happening without the president's blessing. And if an added benefit to your point, Gloria, which I think is a wise one, is the president sees a way to buck up his new chief of staff as well, and really, so yes, give my blessing to this, and yes, look like a chief of staff, heads roll on day one, you're really going to look like you are in charge. I think that plays to his benefit to the president.
No ambiguity. No ambiguity here now.
You know, we were talking before about the James Baker quote. I'm just paraphrasing about, you know, for a chief of staff, you either have somebody who's really big on the chief's piece or really big on the staff piece, and it's the of staff people who are much more successful chiefs of staff. This perhaps being the piece that, you know, Scaramucci was going to be reporting to POTUS instead of now all these Kelly, thank you. I was going to say Reince Priebus to Kelly. And what about the other, you know, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Jared Kushner? Do we know yet? Are they then reporting to General Kelly or to the president? Do we know?
It would seem that way.
You're looking at me like,
no, we don't. We have not heard one by one them answer that question today after John Kelly was sworn in as chief of staff. But Kellyanne Conway was asked that very question yesterday on a Sunday show, and her answer was, "I am here to serve the president and the chief of staff's needs, however I can best be deployed to do that." It was not a clear answer of who she's reporting to, or if her walk-in privileges have been taken away, or what have you.
Even if they are, she'll still communicate with them through the television.
Right, of course.
Right, but this is up to the president, because he has an open door policy. Like you might have in your office, or I might have in your office. Come on in. Well, presidents don't normally have that.
Oval Office privileges.
Oval Office privileges. And so will that change? I mean, that remains to be seen. You know, Donald Trump has run his business this way for decades. He likes chaos. He likes competition among the people who work for him. And this outsourcing of being the person in charge, I think, is something very new to Donald Trump.
But to get the best people, does chaos enable that? I was just thinking, Brooke, about how it took months to find a new communications director.
Right.
This is a vacant job for a long time. Spicer was filling in the job. Then Scaramucci's finally named communications director. Trump had been trying to bring him in for a while. Ryan's apparently been trying to block him. Anyway, finally, Scaramucci is hired. Who's going to get that job now? There were a lot of people in the conservative media world who talked about that job, who turned that job down. I wonder who, if anyone's going to be comms director now.
Let me hit pause on this conversation. If you are just joining us, and let me just bring you all up to speed. Let me welcome our viewers in the United States and all around the world. I'm Brooke Baldwin. It is not a dull Monday afternoon here in New York and beyond. Here's the news. After being in his position as the communications chief at the White House, Anthony SCARAMUCCI has resigned. 11 days later, he's resigned. Now, keep in mind the timing of this resignation also happening on day one of the new chief of staff, General John Kelly, who had come over from Homeland Security. So he's now in this new job. Questions are swirling as to the timing, as to whether or not this was perhaps a condition of General Kelly taking this chief of staff position. Was it so long as SCARAMUCCI left? We remember the story that will be one of the stories of the year, this interview in the New Yorker with Ryan Lizza, and the profanity-laced language that the White House communications director used. Yet 4 days later, that was when he tendered his resignation. And now everyone is feeling the reverberations of this. We're getting more reporting. Let me just begin at the White House with Caitlin Collins, who's a reporter there. Caitlin, we're waiting for a statement from the White House on this resignation. Have we gotten it yet? And what more do we know as far as the why?
We're still waiting on a lot of details as for all of this right now. We're told that the press secretary, the most people upstairs in the press shop at the White House are huddled in an office right now. We're told that we can expect a statement any minute now. We're supposed to see Sarah Sanders at the podium for the briefing here at about 3:45. But right now we're being told by White House officials that Anthony SCARAMUCCI was removed from this position because John Kelly did not think he was disciplined enough and thought he had burned his credibility. As you know, in that interview with the New Yorker writer last week, Anthony SCARAMUCCI went on this vulgar rant against Reince Priebus when he was the chief of staff at the time, and we're told that that played a factor into that he didn't think he was disciplined enough and, to take on this role in this White House. We've seen a lot of that, and that's been a lot of speculation about John Kelly coming into this position as chief of staff, is how he would impose discipline on a West Wing that is filled with fighting from different factions of staffers.
Caitlin, thank you. And let me just bring in my panel, because what you just reported is significant. We don't know if this was a condition of his resignation, but the fact that we're learning that General Kelly wanted SCARAMUCCI out because he didn't think he was disciplined and had burned his credibility. David Chalian, thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is that John Kelly, I am sure, believed that, and this wouldn't have happened unless the president agreed with him. And so I believe that it is the president who also thinks that SCARAMUCCI clearly took on too much water, got too far out in front, no doubt, but really blew himself up in this role in a way that was no longer going to be helpful and gets the added benefit of giving John Kelly a fresh start on day one.
Gloria?
Well, I agree. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in the conversation before Kelly took this job about what it is he would want to do as the White House chief of staff. And I am sure, since this didn't happen, weeks and weeks ago, I am sure that the SCARAMUCCI outburst, the vulgarity, the fact that he said he reported directly to the president, and by the way, threatened publicly to fire everyone.
Right.
Everyone.
Right.
Which, if you're running the White House, who is this guy over there? If you're the chief of staff, who is this guy over there threatening to fire your staff? That's unacceptable if you're coming in to run things. So I'm sure it became a topic of conversation. I'm also sure, I don't know this, but the president has some loyalty to SCARAMUCCI. He was trying to get him a job over and over again. SCARAMUCCI felt he had been blocked by Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon.
Right.
And we don't know yet if he'll have another post in this administration.
And we don't know.
He may have another post in this administration.
Right.
Okay.
So
And that's why this statement we just received is careful. It only says he's leaving his communications director role.
Let me read it. Let me read it. We have it here. This is the statement that we just got from the White House. It's short and sweet. Oh, thank you very much. Anthony SCARAMUCCI will be leaving his role as White House communications director. Mr. SCARAMUCCI felt it was best to give Chief of Staff John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team. We wish him all the best.
Doesn't rule out a job elsewhere in the administration. Remember, he had been at the Export-Import Bank in a brand new role before moving over to the White House. This was such a huge moment for SCARAMUCCI. As Gloria was saying, he had wanted this for months. He had been seeking this for a long time. He had sold his firm in preparation for this, and to lose it all, to see it crumble in
11 days.
11 days. I was going to say less than 2 weeks.
My executive producer just jumped in my ear and said this is the same language that Sean Spicer used. Do you remember that?
That's right.
Similar,
clean slate.
Clean slate. Build his own team.
Right. Turn the page. As the president said on Twitter this morning, no White House chaos, but I mean, look at the banner. The banner on screen says it all. This is chaos at the White House, and it does speak to the president's choices about hiring. This is ultimately about the president and who he decides to hire. Now, he's getting praised for hiring Kelly, and it's Kelly's first day. But SCARAMUCCI, that was a big addition to the team 11 days ago.
Well, and also, if you want to get the bad news out, you know, the controversy, I think the feeling is just do it, get it done. And that's what this is.
You know, Jeff Zeleny was saying from the White House, he was saying this feels more like more than a reset. And I think you had said earlier, almost like a house cleaning in these major role changes. Do we think, though, that this will be enough? I mean, last week we all had whiplash, and now it's just Monday. I mean, do you think with General Kelly as Chief of Staff, David, that this will be, and SCARAMUCCI being gone, and maybe that is a harbinger of things to come as far as how General Kelly will be able to rule? Is this a good thing?
Well, I don't. My guess is
this
is not the end of staff changes in the White House. I can pretty much assure that. I think Kelly clearly is going to have the latitude to do exactly what the statement says and be able to build his own team. And so I think we probably will see some other staff changes. But I think what this SCARAMUCCI thing is, even forget John Kelly's story today. I've never seen a 10-day trajectory like this at all. I mean, this was the dominant person from the Trump White House last week in the news media and every story was Anthony SCARAMUCCI.
Totally.
I mean, he came onto the scene like a rocket.
That's
the announcement that Spicer was leaving, the fact that Priebus and Bannon were not part of it really and trying to, not part of the discussions and last minute trying to stop it from happening, holds the first briefing and does it all himself, names Sarah Huckabee Sanders press secretary, and then goes into this tirade with the New Yorker about Reince on CNN's New Day, sort of with guns blazing. I've just never seen a star burn so bright, so quickly, and flame out.
So what's the moral of the story?
Well,
don't get ahead of the president.
Don't become the star of the show when there's only one star allowed.
And another moral of the story is there's another star, actually 4 stars. 4-star general.
Good one, Gloria.
Right there. And if you're a 4-star general, you might think that somebody who was threatening to fire people publicly, who was getting out ahead of the president and the chief of staff, no matter how tenuous Reince Priebus' tenure was, and threatening to fire him, was not playing within the chain of command. And he might have thought, you know what? This guy has damaged himself so much internally because he's threatened people's jobs, and it's not the way I want to run this White House, and that it was completely untenable. And you know, I think that we'll have to see if he said it to the president or if the president understood that himself.
Let me just explain to all of you what you've been watching on the right side of your screen in the box. These are live pictures from within the White House. For this Medal of Honor ceremony with this Vietnam War veteran who will be the Medal of Honor recipient here momentarily, and we'll take that live. But just to tell you, and a lot of these people we're talking about, including I spied General Kelly, the new day one chief of staff there, sitting in a row at the White House, just to give you perspective on what we're discussing. And then after this, there's Ivanka Trump. Then after this ceremony, we are supposed to have, Stelter, correct me if they've changed it, you know, at 3:45 Eastern Time, this on-camera press briefing. What does the SCARAMUCCI resignation say for any sort of press strategy moving forward?
Right now, there isn't one. That Sarah Huckabee Sanders is still scheduled to have a 3:45 briefing on camera. It may get delayed, partly because of this ceremony and partly because of all this breaking news. I don't think. I wonder if Sarah Sanders, when she came into work this morning, knew that this was going to happen. You know, she has become sort of the only steadying force in the press operation with Spicer out. One of the other assistant press secretaries was also pushed out last week by SCARAMUCCI. Remember, it was just a few days ago, SCARAMUCCI vowed to fire all the leakers. He said, I'm going to fire everyone if I have to. Instead, he's the one out. SNL didn't even have time to cast him, lasting only 11 days. I think a lot of folks wondered, there was even online chatter about this. Who are they going to have play SCARAMUCCI?
Hopefully Mario Cantone enjoyed it while it lasted.
That's right. That's right. He played him on the President's Show.
Just looking at Ivanka Trump.
News.
All right, here's the big breaking news right now. We have some new reporting coming in regarding the newly appointed Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and his response when he learned that President Trump fired James Comey, the then chief of the FBI. Shimon Prokupecz and Pamela Brown are here with us from our Justice Department covering all of this. And so, Shimon, what have you learned? Or Pam?
So I'm going to take it here.
Yep.
So, Brooke, what we've learned that incoming White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, was so upset with the way President Donald Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey that he called Comey shortly after he was terminated to say how angry he was. This is according to two sources familiar with the conversation between Kelly and Comey. At the time, Kelly was Secretary of Homeland Security. The sources say Kelly was particularly upset by the way Comey was treated by learning he had been fired on the news rather than by the president. The call took place while Comey was traveling back from Los Angeles to Washington on May 9th after learning the news. Brooke, I should note Comey declined to comment to us about the story. The White House and the Department of Homeland Security did not comment.
And there's more to this story because we've learned from our sources, Brooke, that Kelly was so angry that he even told Comey at the time that he was contemplating resigning from his position as Secretary of Homeland Security in a showing of solidarity. Comey responded during this phone conversation by telling him not to resign, but clearly it just shows you how upset he was by the way it was handled. Now, we should point out the sources we spoke with cautioned that it was unclear how serious Kelly was about resigning himself, and of course that never happened. Now he is at the White House as Chief of Staff, sworn in today. And for context, the sources said that Comey and Kelly are not particularly close friends, but that they had a professional relationship and a deep mutual respect for one another. And Kelly was so upset, even quote, disgusted, as one of the sources said, about the way Comey had been treated by this president, and that is why he made this phone call to express that and even contemplated resigning at the time in May when this all went down, Brooke.
Okay, so let me broaden this conversation now. We have Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, who knows General Kelly extremely well, served with him for many, many years, and also James Galliano, former FBI, CNN law enforcement analyst. And so first, General Hertling, to you, does this sound like General Kelly, you know that even though it sounds like he wasn't extraordinarily tight with James Comey, he was so upset that he would have contemplated resignation over the way that Comey was treated by the president?
Brooke, I don't want to comment on the reports of palace intrigue or the reality show, which is the White House right now. But what I will tell you is I did get to know John Kelly very well in combat situations on two occasions, both in 2003 and 4, and then again in 2007 and 8 when we were together in Iraq. And what I'll tell you is this is a man of extremely strong values.
Forgive me, as if I don't even know what to say. We just learned, as we're talking about the news with Comey and General Kelly, I now just got a piece of information in my ear that, how long has he been in the job, Scaramucci? The Mooch has been in the job like a week and some change. He has just resigned from his position as Director of Communications. This was someone who, I'm surprised. Let me just be real with you. This is someone who took the job. Remember, Sean Spicer ended up deciding to resign. We know what's happened in the New Yorker interview, the profanity-laced New York interview with Ryan Lizza that Scaramucci did just a couple of days ago when he was speaking ill, not only about Reince Priebus, but also about Steve Bannon. This is extraordinarily significant. We're getting some folks. We're going to jump on set to go through this breaking news that Scaramucci has resigned. Caitlin Collins is at the White House. Caitlin, what? How did this happen?
There's a lot of news coming out right now, Brooke. We have heard that Anthony Scaramucci, the communications director, who was named communications director just last Friday, has been removed from his position. We don't have a lot of details right now, but we do know that there has been a lot of drama since he was brought into this position. We saw Press Secretary Sean Spicer resign in protest over him being named to this position, and then we saw the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, ousted last week over all of this drama that's been going on. As you know, there was that Anthony Scaramucci interview where he blasted Reince Priebus and accused him of being a leaker of White House information. So it's safe to say there's been a lot of drama coming out of the Scaramucci being appointed to this position, and we're likely going to find out more over the next few minutes about what happened with Scaramucci being removed from this position.
Okay, I'm looking at them. I'm talking to you. I'm looking out of the corner of my eyes. We have just mic'd two more people joining me as this news. Again, if you're just joining us, the chief comms director over at the White House, Anthony Scaramucci, who's been in the job. What was he? He was at the podium referring to Reince Priebus as his brother. This was 2 Fridays ago. He has now resigned. Gloria Borger, David Chalian, surprise.
Yes.
What?
Every day. Every day. Well, look, and David can talk about this too. I mean, we are supposing this. I'm texting a bunch of sources now, but it seems to me that the General Kelly is the new sheriff in town.
Okay.
And that maybe he wanted some things very clear before he took the job. Who knows?
As a condition to take the job.
Who knows?
To have the mooch be gone.
I mean, one of
we don't know.
Yeah, one of the things that Anthony Scaramucci made very clear when he took that job 11 days ago and was unveiled and went and had is that he reported to the president.
That's correct.
Well, now there's a new White House chief of staff, so the reporting structure to the president is clearly part of a discussion that a new chief of staff would have with the president about how this is going to work. You also have to look at this. It seems to me, I mean, we thought Reince Priebus's tenure was short as chief of staff. If you look at the history books,
6 whole months.
This must be the shortest communications director tenure ever. It was almost like a suicide mission. He strapped on a suicide vest. His 11-day mission will be known as getting rid of Reince Priebus, from accelerating the departure of Reince Priebus from the job as chief of staff. He went in, he blew him up initially when he was at the podium that Friday, talking about we're like brothers, but we're at odds, and I'm not reporting to him.
Right.
Clearly trying to act like chief of staff. He then does that outrageous, salacious New Yorker interview. And now he's out of a job. So his total mission, Anthony Scaramucci, seems to have been about getting Reince Priebus out of that job.
But then he didn't resign over the language he used, which in any corporate setting, one would not have a job the next day.
And in any military setting either, by the way.
Yeah.
And also, we all knew at the time that Scaramucci was channeling the president's feelings about Reince Priebus. Not his language, okay, but he was channeling the president's feelings. So you can imagine when you have someone like General Kelly coming in, he wants to make the lines of authority very clear. He wants to make sure everybody's going to go through me, perhaps, I would assume, that Scaramucci had already said, by the way, I don't have to go through the chief of staff, I can go to the president himself, and by the way, I'm going to fire everybody. Well, if you're the incoming chief of staff, you're going to say, wait a minute, I don't think that's how it needs to work or should work. And why wouldn't he have had a conversation with the president about these kinds of things before he took the job?
Let me go to Jeff Zeleny, who also has some reporting on the fact that Scaramucci and his big 11 days as comms director at the White House are over. Jeff Zeleny, what have you learned?
Brooke, we are learning that there will be a statement coming out shortly, we believe, certainly this afternoon, likely pretty soon, from the White House, explaining all of this. Explaining what led to this really abrupt decision, as David and Gloria were just talking about there, after about 10 days or so in this position and not yet even actually officially starting. He was going to officially start this week, but we're told that there will be a statement coming out, and there's a potential possibility here, Brooke, that he could be moving to a different job. We don't know that. We're being advised that to be very careful with our language here. But we do know the president effectively lost faith and some confidence in Anthony Scaramucci after, that tirade, as you said, that he went on against Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, who remains still in the West Wing as the chief strategist here. So the language was one thing that the president initially, we were told, was fine with, but once all the coverage started coming in about this, he was somewhat alarmed by it. So, Brooke, I mean, this is a house cleaning day, and first and foremost, the president appearing with his chief of staff, and he did say that everyone would report to the chief of staff. He has the full authority here. Where, Brooke, this is the first big sign that, of course, includes Anthony Scaramucci. That has been a lingering question. Would he continue reporting to the president? Now it doesn't matter because he is out. And this is certainly a big moment. I would call this more than a reset. This is something that is a sign that people who have the president's ear are telling him that this was not a good thing to have Anthony Scaramucci as the communications director. And this is a moment we do not yet know if it was John Kelly's doing here, but we do know the president was dissatisfied and unhappy with Anthony Scaramucci. We heard that earlier today. So, Brooke, as we get more on this, we'll bring it to you, but keep an eye out for that statement coming shortly.
We will keep an eye out for it, also keeping in mind that the White House was supposed to be having this on-camera briefing in just about an hour from now. We'll stay tuned to see if that happens, but I've got some more guests here. I want to bring in Pam Brown. Pam Brown is our justice correspondent who has some news?
I do. So I am told by a person familiar with the situation that Anthony Scaramucci went to the now Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and offered to resign. And John Kelly, of course, accepted, as we know. And the reasoning behind it, he said, is that he wanted to allow John Kelly, now as the Chief of Staff, to create his own team. That is sort of the reasoning that was given. But I think it's a significant sign in terms of how much latitude the new Chief of Staff has in this situation. The person I was speaking with made that point, that clearly this is sending a strong signal that John Kelly, as Chief of Staff, is in charge. He has a lot of latitude, and clearly Anthony Scaramucci went to him, offered to resign, and that's the end of it. He is now gone.
But it also clearly reflects that President Trump lost confidence in Scaramucci as a spokesperson for him, as an image, as somebody whose image he thought was working to his advantage. If this, no doubt, John Kelly was able to build his own team, I have no doubt, but if President Trump thought Anthony Scaramucci's performance over the last 11 days was how he wanted to be seen and what he wanted to be, this would keep going even with a new Chief of Staff.
But, he never commented about Scaramucci's vulgarity. He never said, this is inappropriate, this is unacceptable, because the message that Scaramucci was delivering about Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, by the way, was clearly sanctioned by the President of the United States. So, there is a new sheriff in town. He's doing things a little bit differently, and I think he wanted to make it very clear, and Scaramucci offered it, as you're reporting, but I'm wondering whether that was
what was behind
required.
That. Right.
Jim Acosta, just adding voices to this whole conversation. Jim Acosta is our senior White House correspondent, also standing by with a little bit more news on the Scaramucci resignation after 11 days. Jim, what have you learned?
Well, the president was insisting earlier this morning on Twitter that there is no White House chaos. I think we now have further evidence that nothing could be further from the truth. There is obviously White House chaos when a communications director is only on the job for 11 days and then has to resign after a profanity-laced tirade that dominated the news for part of last week. You have chaos here at the White House. Now, I was talking to a friend of Anthony Scaramucci just in the last couple of hours who was insisting that he was going to weather this storm and that the story about him dog cussing some of the people here at the White House, that all of that was going to pass. Obviously, that did not pass.
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?